Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with hosts Clara and Jimmy Hinton. If you're new to the podcast, please look us up on your favorite podcast app, subscribe, like, and share so that you never miss an episode. If you'd like to further support us, visit patreon.com/speakingout and check out the different rewards. You'll find exclusive rewards if you sign up as a patron of the podcast. Thank you for your support, and let's get into the show. Is the American church decline contributing to abuse? Welcome to this week's podcast. Thank you to our patrons who make this podcast possible. We have some reorganization within our Patreon that's coming very soon. We have some pretty good surprises. Some good motivators for people to sign up and become patrons to help support this podcast and make it possible. I'm pretty excited about that.
I am too. I'm very excited. We'll be telling you more in the next week or so. So stay tuned. Patrons is going to be good.
Yep. We're always about building, making better, going back and enhancing things and making it better for our supporters because we genuinely appreciate you guys. The American church is in what I call a rapid free fall. I've been sounding this alarm with our congregation for 5-6 years now. I sounded the alarm to our congregation. I said, look, if we don't make some pretty serious changes, here's where we're going to be in 5 years. Here we are 5 years later. This Sunday, we had 29 people in person. I mean, it is declining quickly. We had 4 deaths in the last 12 months just within our congregation. Those are actively involved church members, very good friends of mine. We've been dealt a very serious blow, and I fear that that's not going to slow down anytime soon. I'm going to read from an article that this is just one of many, but this is from the Pew Research Center, pewforum.org. This was from October of 2019. The title of the article, in U.S., decline of Christianity continues at rapid pace. The religious landscape of the United States continues to change at a rapid clip. In Pew Research Center telephone surveys conducted in 2018 and 19, 65% of American adults describe themselves as Christians when asked about their religion, down 12 percentage points over the past decade. Meanwhile, the religiously unaffiliated share of the population, consisting of people who describe their religious identity as atheist, agnostic, or nothing in particular, also known as the nones, N-O-N-E-S's, that now stands at 26%, up from 17% in 2019. The number of people who have any identification with Protestant religion is at 43%. Also, for the first time in U.S. history, people who clearly identify as Christian, regular attending Christian members has dropped below 50%. That has never happened in the history of the U.S. before.
No, but look what's happening in the U.S. We are experiencing things in the U.S. that have never happened in our history before. And you named it within the small group of your church that you pastor. When you get dealt blows like the deaths of several of your key people who were servants, had the heart of God, and they have died, and you feel those losses. It's like living within a family in these smaller churches. You don't just wake up the next morning and say, oh, okay, so sister so-and-so died, things will go back to normal. Or brother so-and-so died, things will be normal. They're not. It takes time for churches to recover. Add to that the grief and all the turmoil that churches are going through with all the stuff that has happened with abuse. I mean, think about it and think of people who never had abuse on their radar before within a church, and now all these thousands of people are coming out, and we're hearing voices and things we never heard before. We're hearing of cover-ups that happened for 70, 80, 100 years. That's discouraging.
I think I think that's right. I think
Yeah.
all of these decades of cover-ups are finally those seeds have been planted for all
Yes.
those years, and now that harvest has come
You
to
got it,
fruition.
Jimmy.
And
You got it.
we've the churches have not been sowing good seeds by covering up abuse,
Right.
and I
Not at
think it's
all.
come
No.
back to bite with a
Yeah,
vengeance.
it has. You combine all of that, plus we had the whole COVID epidemic, which changed the structure of churches. Churches went
Absolutely.
online, they went virtual. A lot of people got used to that. They, liked sitting in the comfort of their living rooms and participating that way. Many thousands of people will never go back
Right.
to traditional worship.
That's right.
And so you have a lot of changes that the church has been dealt. It's no wonder that there's a decline.
Well, the other thing too, the vast majority of churches, in this article, it mentioned that 57% of all church attendance is held in churches of 100 or less. That number used to be a little bit higher.
Right.
That average now has
Right.
dropped down to less than 100. So if you think about that, the majority of church membership are churches like mine,
Right.
where we don't have
Right.
a lot of resources. We don't have a
No.
lot of finances to back us. I know of just about every denomination in our county. They have one pastor that shares something like anywhere from 2 to 5 churches.
Right.
So they'll go around on any given Sunday, and they'll preach at not one church, but 2 to 5 churches, because they can't
Well-
afford to pay.
If you
Preachers.
go back not too terribly many years, probably 65 maybe, in the very church where you preach, the standing minister there, who was there for 49 years, he was a traveling minister. He was never fully supported by that congregation.
Yep.
He traveled to several different locales, and that was his job. On Sunday, he'd start at one church and travel around. And
I think the difference is those churches were expanding and growing. He
Right.
had planted, I forget how many churches, but
planted
he had
a lot of-
planted
yeah,
multiple
he
churches
did,
that are still in
yeah.
existence
Right.
today. So even though the finances weren't there to support him locally, he said, "Okay, how do we plant the church and keep the kingdom growing?"
And I think that was the work several years ago. You had the preachers who were dedicated to, they lived such lives of sacrifice. They truly did.
Yeah.
And got paid in eggs and chickens and such. And,
I think back then, the difference was the mentality was how do we grow
Right.
the church?
you got it.
Now, preachers are forced out into those same circuits, and now the mindset has shifted to how do we make the church survive? How do we keep it on life support?
Big difference, isn't there?
Right.
Between,
Huge difference.
Yeah, big difference.
So at the same time that this is going on, these smaller churches, like the one that I'm at, we keep getting smaller and smaller, weaker and weaker, less finances. I mean, our budget, I just told Mom what it is. I'm not going to say it to the public, but our entire annual budget doesn't even come close to what just my salary is. And let me tell you, as a small
Well,
church
right.
pastor, I am not rolling in the dough. Believe me.
Well,
when I
your
say
wife works
it is
a full-time
she
job.
does and has to.
Right. You live on a tight budget, which is what's going on in all these small local churches. And you add this one thread and I've said this for years and years and years, ever since I began as a preacher's wife, there's one thing that will kill a church more than anything, and that's discouragement. And once that seed of discouragement
Yep.
begins growing, it's like a yeast that leavens all the bread. That discouragement just grows and grows
Yep.
until people finally just drop off. And when you have deaths and you have hardship and you have, COVID, you have all the issues with abuse, you add that all together. It's sad for churches. It
It
truly
really is.
It's very discouraging.
Well, this other article I wanted to point out because there is another trend that's happening, and that is that so the title of the article is just this. This is Christianity Today. This was March 6, 2019. The church growth gap, the big get bigger while the small get smaller. So it's happening right now, and I heard one person, I can't remember the source of this, so forgive me for that, but he called this church culture, the big getting bigger and the small getting smaller, the Walmart effect. So your small mom and pop churches are not just dwindling down and not able to survive. We can't compete with big churches. You just can't do it.
No.
It's
impossible. Yeah.
So, the issue is, or one of the issues is that it's not just about churches declining. It's about the smaller churches being looked down upon. So it's like, oh, well, you go to that church. And that mentality exists even here in our town.
It does. And, as we're talking about this, the big get bigger and the small get smaller. I can remember teaching Bible classes 35, 40 years ago. We had paper and crayons. We had
the felt board.
Yes.
Those felt boards where you stuck the felt figures to the board.
Exactly. Now you sit children in a classroom with that today, and they get bored out of their minds because they're technology oriented. In the bigger church, everything is with technology. Truly is.
And it's overkill, to be honest.
Well, it is, but kids are used to that. In school, they're all, from kindergarten, pre-K. They're on computers. Everything is technology designed. So you get in a classroom where it's a small country classroom with crayons and a little reader or a handout paper, and it's sheer boredom. Kids can't connect to that anymore.
Yeah.
So your bigger churches know how to connect, how to plug in everyone from the youngest to the oldest, and the little churches are left by the wayside.
Well, I think the assumption too is the wrong assumption is that the small churches are insignificant. Like, we have people
wrong.
that, we have people who've left our church who, they've said some pretty hurtful things about the church, and why they were leaving. And I'm just like, we are no less worthy than other people who are rolling up their sleeves, regardless of what size church you're in.
And let me clarify. Technology doesn't make God or Jesus become any more alive in the heart of a person.
Not at all.
And to me, that actually detracts from it. I would rather sit in a group and talk face to face, have kids read the scriptures and make them come alive right there in that situation, or with adults. However, I think we're missing the mark.
Yeah.
But you're right. People turn down their noses as if to say, you mean you haven't caught up with things? You're not doing this? You mean you're still
stuck in the Stone Ages?
You still use hymnals? You mean you don't have, and on it goes. Or your budget doesn't allow for this? Or, your pews are the old wooden pews. They're not the soft cushion for our elderly people. You can go on and on and on. And you're right.
But I think what people are looking at is the production and
physical,
not the hearts of people.
Right.
And what people are capable of in reaching their neighbor. So from this article that I just referenced, the church growth gap, the big get bigger while the small get smaller, says a new study from Exponential by Lifeway Research found 6 in 10 Protestant churches are plateaued or declining in attendance. 6 out of 10.
That's, when you
And this
say
was
that, yeah, it's over
pre-pandemic.
50%.
This was
Over
pre-pandemic.
half,
It's
right,
gotten worse.
Right. Oh, yeah.
And more than half saw fewer than 10 people become new Christians in the past 12 months. This is a quote. "Growth is not absent from American churches," said Scott McDonald, executive director of Lifeway Research, "but rapid growth through conversions is uncommon." And then there's another article that I thought was interesting for how we got there. This was an article actually just written a couple days ago, November 4th, by Terry Austin in BaptistNews.com. The title of his article is "How the Evangelical Church Messed Up and Lost Its Way." Some of the key points that he mentioned are because we have this big explosion of churches, because we're so focused on dumping the small churches and going for the bigger, better Walmart churches, he says that we've really put our focus on production, and we've lost focus of stewardship. So he says stewardship morphed into greed. And he makes some really good points here because he says, churches at one time were really good stewards of money. They would take their money. A small part of that would be allocated to staffing. A very small part of that would be allocated to building funds. Right. And then the majority of that money was used for missions. Right. That's no longer the case anymore at all. In fact, some churches, a lot of churches, I would argue, have no mission budget.
That's heartbreaking, isn't it? Really,
yeah, it's all about building
it really is.
Physical building.
It's heartbreaking to hear this because we've strayed so far from the original design of the church, which was to serve our fellow humans.
Yeah. Then his second point, worship turned into performance. I love this sentence. He said, "Put the congregation in an auditorium, turn out the lights, and as soon as the spotlight comes on, you can tell who is being worshipped. I've seen this countless times, and the light never shines on Jesus. Attention always tilts toward a performer." Bingo.
It is.
Not
Yeah.
that it's bad to have a well-oiled worship service. I'm all for it. In fact, I wish we would put a little more effort into ours. I think we do the best with what we have available, but I'm all for a well-oiled worship service, but his idea is, his point is not lost on me, that worship has turned into performance to where you have these professional performers, and that's where the focus is. We'll draw people into this worship experience instead of connecting them to each other.
The last several worship services that I attended around Christmas time were absolutely gorgeous, but I can be honest with you, my focus was on the lighting and the way the light person changed the lighting to give the ambience of within the
to set the mood.
To set the mood. The flowers, I found myself counting how many floral arrangements, how many poinsettias lined the entire building. I was focused on the voices of the singers and who had the most lovely, solo voice. My mind wasn't focused on Jesus. I'll be honest with you, because there were so many distractions. Were they beautiful? Yeah, but that's not where my mind was supposed to be. That's not where my heart was supposed to be.
Yeah, and there's a word that comes to mind. I visit a lot of really big churches with, the travels that I do and speaking on abuse. And I love visiting other churches. But with the really huge churches, the one word that comes to mind, it's an R word, and that is rehearsed. Everything is rehearsed. Everything to a T.
Yeah.
To a fault.
It is.
Everything is rehearsed.
Timed perfectly.
Absolutely. To
yes,
the second.
Timed. Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
So, again, not that in itself is bad, but when that becomes more of the focus at the expense of people, we've got a problem. His next point, leadership turned into celebrity. He says, "I have no idea when Christian leaders became celebrities. Once again, we need historians to tell us. For most of my life, Billy Graham was the closest thing we knew to a Christian celebrity. Now look at it. I mean, people follow churches because of the pastor, or should I say they follow the pastor and they associate themselves with that church.
Right.
It's a really poisonous culture. And then next point, discipleship turned into partisanship. Evangelicals have always been big on rules. As a kid, we frequently heard the expression, no mixed bathing. It didn't mean sharing time in the shower. Every youth camp had a rule preventing boys and girls from swimming simultaneously. Other rules included things like no smoking or drinking, divorce is a sin, premarital sex certainly was a no-no. However, rule keeping did not help people get closer to God. So it's this really toxic letting people know what you're against, not what you're for, what you're against.
Yes.
That's partisanship. So discipleship, actually, the word disciple means to follow. We're not discipling people. We're not showing people how to follow our example.
Right.
We're not showing people how to follow Christ. We're partisan hacks in the church. We're so actively engaged as a culture. This is not just church. Trust me. I think you guys probably know this if you spend 2 seconds on social media.
Right.
People have gotten caught in this trap of
It's our
which
society.
side is right and which side is wrong.
It is. Our society has just shifted so much. That being said, I still hold out hope for little churches. I've been watching online a small church that I'll share with you after the podcast. But I have received so much encouragement from this. I honestly think they have maybe 25 people there, but they share from the heart. There's no time frame. There's no, monitor saying, you're done, time to talk is done. They get up and they share their experience with Jesus. What happened? What was that defining moment when they actually gave their life to Christ? What happened in their lives that changed them? And it's so refreshing to me. I can remember, Jimmy, some camp events where you would sit out on a hill and sing hymns. We did it out at our place a few times also, where those moments will never be forgotten. Those moments. And I think people, if they paused long enough, are yearning for that. We have lost the ability to talk with one another. We are so used to simply pushing a button and being entertained. We've lost the ability to share, to talk, to open our hearts, to share the good and the bad, to share our weaknesses.
And to just be normal. I talk about that a lot too.
Yes.
Like people really change when they walk inside the church building and the church lingo automatically comes out.
Yep.
Hey, brother, how are you? I'm like, when you run into me, in Walmart, you're like, hey, dude, what's up?
Yeah.
And then we come here and now all of a sudden I'm brother and, and you're using the the whisper voice where you, everything is, you're talking, even the way you talk is different. And I'm like, just be normal, Like,
it is.
Yeah.
And we have lost the ability or the, I don't know what you would call it, the desire, actually, to walk in each other's homes. We almost need to set an appointment now. And that's so far from what I feel the church should be. Church is not just meeting 1 hour a week on a Sunday morning.
Right.
It is far beyond that. And that's how we share Jesus and our faith.
And it requires sacrifice and it's a lot of work,
It is, and it isn't. I have now several friends who come up my driveway anytime. You know what? The last person was a few days ago that I said, come visit me, to this husband and wife. And they looked at me and they said, without calling? And I said, yeah, just come visit me. They have a relative that's one of my neighbors. I said, when you go out to visit your relative, stop by, see me for a few minutes. We've lost that. And that is also hurting churches, big time.
Oh, it definitely is. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think too, I have this written down here, but it's so much easier to deconstruct or to tear down
You
than it is
got
to
it.
build
Yes.
up.
There you
Building
go.
up, like right now, we're in a position where we're small, we're fractured, our church. We've been through multiple crises in the last few years. A lot of people have chosen to leave for various reasons. Multiple people have died in the last year. Very dear friends. Building up takes strategy, it takes time, it takes effort,
Does.
it takes faith, it takes energy, it takes will, it takes resolution.
Unzipping the outward facade, opening up and showing your inside.
Yep.
It takes sharing. It just takes, instead of, hey Jimmy, how you doing? It's, hey Jimmy, you holding up okay? I'm feeling like crap this week.
Right.
I really miss whoever. I miss them being here. Church hasn't felt the same yet. We miss that. It's sitting in a small group and holding hands and praying. I think the small church will survive, but I think it's going to have to go through a period of, it's kind of like when Jesus says trim the branches, and the branches have now been trimmed, and now you have the bare stalk, and you're going to start over again.
Yeah, I think too. I do.
I hold hope.
But I think we have to be really careful about the deconstruction, the
Oh,
criticism,
yes.
the what ifs, all that stuff, because deconstruction happens really quickly. And if you need any evidence of this, look at what's happening in Haiti right now. Haiti was doing so well just a few years ago, and now, in the matter of 2 years, that country is just. I don't know how they're going to recover for where they're at right now. It is desperate. I just got multiple messages this morning from a dear friend of mine, a Haitian preacher, and you know who he is.
I do.
He's
Yes.
always positive, always
Love
smiling.
him dearly. Yes.
This was the first time ever that he sounded genuinely desperate, and he said, "I can't feed.
What's that
I can't
word?
feed my
And
family."
I think Satan is busy spreading discouragement. The more discouragement, the more people just look to
They give up. Yeah.
Just give up.
And they start tearing each other apart.
Yes.
And that's what's happening in
right,
Haiti.
yeah.
You have
yes.
you have all these gangs. You have people who are desperate. It's
Gangs,
to each his
murders,
own.
Killing.
People are just trying to
Do
survive
anything
right now.
to get food. Just no fuel, no food,
Yep.
no way of getting it, no jobs, no homes. They've been stripped of everything.
Yeah,
and
literally.
If that's not discouragement, I don't know what is.
But for me, it was really encouraging, because I want to read part of his message, because I think this is, and I wasn't planning this, but I just thought this was really
I like
powerful.
the unplanned, Jimmy.
I do too.
I do.
So he said, things are bad here now. If possible for you to help me find some money to feed some members, widows and orphans. He said some of them are very sick. I know you have a good heart, and each time I have a problem and I share it with you, you never get angry to hear it. Of course I don't get angry, because I know what it's like to struggle. I know what it's like for life to suck.
Oh, wow.
And I don't live in this complex that a lot of these big churches have, where, and it's not just big church. I'm not picking on big churches. There's nothing wrong with having a big church, because there are plenty of small churches that are like this too. But just when we get in this mindset where we're so self-absorbed that we forget about other people who are genuinely trying to put food in their mouth for the next day.
When we are more worried about what chandelier to get than feeding the starving, then our hearts have wandered from the very purpose of God.
Yeah.
It has.
But I think this is where the hope is. Oops,
Yeah.
sorry. This is where the hope is
Yes.
for the small church, because
Yes.
this is something tangible that we can help right now. We can
sure
we can
can,
gather
yes.
money up, and
Yeah.
we
Yes.
might be a poor church, but we can gather money up, and we can help him.
I just wrote an article, which you probably didn't read this week. I published it 2 days ago, but one of the things I said was, no cupboard is so empty that we can't share something with another. And isn't that the
Right.
truth?
Absolutely.
Isn't that the truth? We can, especially in the United States, we are so blessed.
We really
We
are.
are so blessed. So, what's this have to do with child abuse,
Well,
Jimmy?
okay. So the last point that I wanted to mention is that, at the same time, churches are declining, small churches are declining, the smaller are getting smaller, churches are closing their doors at unprecedented rates. People are so confused now because there's so much partisanism that's going on that they don't even know what they stand for anymore. The number of people who claim to be agnostic or have no religious affiliation whatsoever
Right.
is increasing exponentially. At the same time that all this is going on, small churches are not insurable anymore because of the onslaught of abuse that they've covered up for decades. There's another article. I don't have time to really read from this. I'll link to it in the description of this podcast. But here's a quote from this website. This is about church insurance. In 2010, insurance coverage for a child sexual abuse claim would be found within the overall limits in the general liability section of a policy. No longer. A variety of coverages associated with sexual misconduct now exists. Ministry leaders, be careful here. Read the terms closely. There are several types of quote-unquote sexual misconduct that might be addressed by an insurance policy, including sexual harassment, sexual assault, inappropriate reporting of sexual abuse, improper supervision of a registered sex offender, inappropriate sexual relationships, for example, affairs, pure sexual abuse, and inappropriate boundaries by counselors or clergy. Read the policy terms carefully to ensure that child sexual abuse is a covered risk. Now, let me tell you, as somebody who is living this, we lost our insurance policy. Our insurer came to the church several years ago and said, you're no longer insurable. Surprised the living daylights out of us. We searched high and low to find a single insurer in the nation that would cover us. We found one. It was triple the policy rate. Now, keep in mind, we're a small church, very financially strapped. Our insurance policy overnight, which was not cheap, tripled. In that process, with our new shiny policy, they stripped out the clause for child sexual abuse. Ironically, our church is not covered for child sexual abuse
That
anymore.
kind of blew me away when you told me that. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we find ourselves in this really,
Right.
really, really challenging place. And this is just the reality that's facing most small churches and nonprofit organizations, Christian or not, mostly Christian. But the majority of churches that remain in the U.S. are not insurable, or at least they're having this the policy on child sexual abuse stripped out of their policies. So what do we conclude for this? One, I think church culture is shifting. It's shifting power to mega churches, where production, show, and amassing mega donors is more prevalent than serving neighbors intimately. That's just a reality. That's not a criticism. That's just where
Right.
every church statistician is showing that's where we're going. Meanwhile, small churches are no longer insurable. They can't afford the crappy coverage that's offered, and they're getting more and more starved for volunteers, more than ever. Small churches have always been starved for volunteers. Now it's at a critical level.
Well, I was going to say, when you have the numbers that small churches now have, how can you financially support it? You're going to have to depend on volunteers for the bulk of everything.
And they're burned out. I mean,
I was just going to say,
we're
people are
experiencing-
worn down.
We can't find volunteers for anything because we
Right.
don't have them.
Because people are tired. They're just mentally exhausted. Most families have two people working,
Yeah.
multiple jobs. Sometimes just two jobs doesn't do it.
That's right.
You have a husband working or a wife working an extra job yet on the weekend just to make ends meet in their own home. So, there are so many things that factor into the small church make it painfully discouraging. But we're going to end on a positive note
No, we're
before
not.
this is all done.
Just kidding.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are.
So this is where I see it going. This is the third point. I think this affords abusers ample opportunity to step up to the plate of volunteerism, which is what they're good at to begin with. But now that door is it's a wide open floodgate. So while churches and children are incredibly vulnerable right now, this is just playing right into the ploy of abusers. I think abuse is going to get much worse, not better. So where is the silver lining in this, if there is one? One is that I think this is a wake-up call for us. I think for Christians right now, anybody who's listening who is a Christian, we're at a critical crossroads, and I am the last person to advocate for people giving up on the church. It bothers me like nothing you've ever known when people just give up on the church and like, see, the church is screwed. And I'm like, that is the absolute worst attitude and most selfish form of abandonment. And I'm not talking about survivors who've been abused and experienced trauma. That's not what I'm talking about, because that I understand. I do understand. There are many abuse survivors who cannot physically get near a church. Believe me, I'm empathetic.
I think a lot of people, Jimmy, have said they give up. They've become agnostic and whatnot, because in finding out so much that the church has deceived people with,
Sure.
People lose faith.
Yeah,
Now,
and they don't know how to trust anybody.
Right. Granted, our faith isn't to be in people. It's to be in God. But let's face it, it's hard to separate the two. You know, when you become close friends and you worship together for years on end, and then you find out, wait a minute, my church covered up abuse for all those years. They knew that so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so, these children were abused, and they covered it up, and they you know, it's almost like, I can't take it. Satan is having a heyday right now.
He is, but I think here's what's going to happen. I think it is a tremendous wake-up call for Christians, and it needs to be. I think that's a good thing. I think there is this refining by fire. I don't think that's a bad thing in itself. I think it probably needs to happen. The other thing that I think we're going to start seeing with this pendulum swinging is, regardless of where people are on this spectrum of deeply, profoundly religious, agnostic, hanging on to organized religion, not having anything to do with organized religion, wherever you are on this spectrum, I think the one thing that needs to happen, and I think is going to happen, is that we're going to start treating people with humanity and empathy and compassion. The people like my friend who are crying out for help, I got to tell you, like that took me about an hour to just kind of recover from that message. But I'm not like in fetal position sucking my thumb. What this did to me is it lit a fire under my butt to say, Jimmy, you have so many blessings in your life. What are you going to do about it?
Here's an opportunity
to
actually
and how do you engage the church?
Right.
And invite people into this arena of helping somebody who's in dire
need. That's how Jesus becomes more real. When we display that kind of compassion to others, we're not sitting being entertained. We're actually active in the service.
Yeah.
There's no better feeling than that, is there?
Yeah.
There is no better feeling than being able to help like this.
Yeah. So while I see child abuse, we're just in a really vulnerable place right now. It's not the end of the story. I think we can overcome that if we become educated, if we become aware. It doesn't take millions or even thousands of dollars to do that. There's so much information, free information on the internet right now. There is no excuse to not be informed. Zero, zip, Zilch.
Amen. Yes. Yes.
No reason to not
Right.
be informed for any Christian. It's not up to the leaders to prod you along. Any lay church member can, on their own, become informed as
And
deeply
protect our
and
children.
as well as they want
Yes,
to
we
be.
need.
It's
Yeah.
available online.
Right. Yes.
There's
Yes.
plenty of education
Right.
and help.
Right.
So I think more and more people are going to do that. I really do.
I do too.
I think people are fed up with seeing how the church has tolerated abuse, and I think we're going to make a
Never
turnaround.
more have we been more aware of what's going on,
Yeah.
and what we need to do and what we can do
Yes.
about it. Never more than right now. To me, that is a huge positive.
Yes, yeah. The awareness is
Yes.
definitely off the
Right.
charts right
Yep.
now. People
For
are
sure.
aware now. We just have to get people
Step
really
up to the plate
educated
and start.
and
Yes.
step into
Yeah.
to the lives of helping your neighbor.
Right.
And when you see people in need, forget about what organized religion is doing. Forget about trying to plead and convince your leaders to step in and help your neighbor. Forget about it.
Just
do
take the
it
next best step. Do it.
and invite
Yeah.
other
Yeah.
church members to do
Yes.
it. Invite other Christians to do it.
Yes.
It's
Report
really that
back
simple.
to us in a few weeks about how your small congregation responded to this
Yeah,
plea.
I
And
will. I already have-
I guarantee you it's going to be beautiful.
I had an online Bible study this
Beautiful.
morning and already had people saying, give us the information
It's
for where
going
to
to
send
be
money.
beautiful.
We want to help.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
and he's a dear friend. He is a
Yes.
good guy. So,
He sure is.
all right. Well, thank you for tuning into this episode. I hope it made sense. I know we kind of talked in circles a little bit.
It does make sense. Yes.
But I think we're moving in a maybe a rippled but a good direction. It's going to be a little bit interesting, but
It
I
will,
think
yeah.
we're going to move in a good direction.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you next episode.
Thanks again for listening to today's episode. A special thank you to our patrons who make this podcast possible. Please help us get the word out by searching for the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast in your favorite podcast app. Be sure to hit subscribe and rate the show. Please consider supporting the podcast by becoming a patron and check out the rewards our patrons receive.